Hi everyone, it's Gerard from Missio Scotland, and on our We Are Mission podcast today we have Mill Hill Missionary, Father John Doran, and he's going to talk to us a wee bit about his life and his career. So Father John, thanks very much for agreeing to speak to us.
Thanks.
First of all, let's go back to the very beginning. Where did you grow up? What was family life like when you were younger?
I grew up in a place called Bootle, Bootle to Liverpool is a bit like Paisley to Glasgow. You know, it's a smaller place in the shadow of a big city. It's a small town, but you move. If you didn't know where you were, you'd move from Bootle to Liverpool without noticing. You know, it's all streets and houses now.
Yeah.
I grew up there in a poor, I suppose what you'd call a poor Dockland area.
Mm-hmm.
But very happy childhood, very happy at home. My parents had lots of friends and very happy at school, parish school. So I was 11.
And was it just yourself? Do you have any brothers and sisters?
No.
Just yourself. And your mum and dad, what did they do for work?
My dad was a docker,
Mm-hmm.
and a docker in those days was probably the same in Glasgow and Edinburgh. It was casual labour, so it meant if you were lucky, you'd work for maybe 6 or even 7 days a week. If you were unlucky, you'd work for maybe 2, maybe 1, maybe no days a week, and no work, no pay.
Yeah.
Right. And my mum was a housewife, but my mum did lots of jobs, mostly part-time, to make ends meet. So, yeah.
And did you say, I think when I've spoken to you previously, you mentioned that she had some sort of role in the council, was that right?
Yeah. My mum and my dad both left school. In those days, in the 20s when they were leaving school, most people left school when they're 12 or 13, didn't go to high school, left school when you were 12, I think, 13. Dad went to sea, 13. My mum did all sorts of jobs. She did work in the laundry, tried her hand at being a domestic worker, a servant. That only lasted a week because she was homesick. But she ended up being a supervisor in the civil defence unit during the war. And then after the war, she became the secretary to the town clerk, which in those days was quite a big job because town clerk ran the town. The mayor was like the figurehead. He was the mayor. He was in office usually, I think, for a year or two. Town clerk, it was his job. He was the top civil servant. He ran the town. And my mum was his secretary till she got married. And after that, she was again back in, bits and pieces of shops, factories, whatever.
Yeah. Well, as we're going to speak a wee bit later, maybe you could have done with a town clerk in the Philippines. But so I think when I'd spoken to you in times past, you'd said that one of your interests was boxing. You quite like boxing.
I boxed for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could you have went professional?
No.
Just...
I boxed for 2 years as a boy. We lived in a very tough area, and I was quite a gentle child.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad thought it was a good idea to go to boxing school. So I boxed 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm. I
started when I was 8, retired when I was 10, because the priest asked me to be an altar server, and the times clashed. So I packed in boxing at 10. But having said that, boxing 3 times a week, 2 hours a week, for 2 years at that age, you do learn very well,
mm-hmm.
And then when I was 20, I went back to boxing for 2 years in the Netherlands. And but amateur, obviously,
yeah.
And, I like boxing, I was okay at it. And it served me well.
Your first kind of taste of maybe routine and discipline, and
and also fighting. I learned how to fight. I learned how to defend myself. I learned how to defend other people,
mm-hmm.
which is just as important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we used to do when we were kids. Didn't just, defend ourselves, but very often we would defend other people, weaker people.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I mean, and getting back to your faith, I believe that you were involved with another kind of box, and you were, collecting for the missions with your mum.
Boxes,
Yeah. And so did you? That obviously kind of points to having come from a very kind of strong Catholic background, sort of thing. Was that the case? Was faith quite an important part from an early?
Yeah, practically Catholic. So obviously we'd all wait mass every Sunday. Very often during the week, my parents would go during the week if they could. My dad obviously always couldn't because of work.
Mm-hmm.
Mum always couldn't, but and then when I would go during the week when I could, because our school was next door to the church. And when I became a server, then you'd be on for a week maybe. Every week you'd be serving at least for a week. Every month you do at least a week, sometimes two. So we had an early morning mass, 7:15, had an evening mass 5:30, and the plumber assignment was 9:00 mass because you got half an hour of school. So that was the best of the best.
And when you were at school, did you have an idea of what you wanted to be, or did you not quite know?
No, I think the first thing I wanted to be when I was you start thinking 8, 9. I think I would have been a ballet dancer. That's what I wanted to be first. That's before I understood that ballet dancing was sissy. But then again, at that time, I fancied myself as being so sort of tough that I didn't care what anybody thought about me.
Yeah.
Sissy, you just have to give them a smack.
And now you've got some fantastic male dancers all over the world, and maybe you could have been the first.
No. But then that was only a passing phase.
Yeah.
But then the only things I seriously considered would either be going into the army or the Marines or being a missionary priest. Not of great love and respect for ordinary, regular priests, but never crossed my mind to be a diocesan priest.
Mm-hmm.
Never occurred to me. And if I couldn't have been a missionary, I would not have been a priest. It was to be a missionary.
So it was very, very succinct.
Yeah, and it was either that, say, or the forces, and I was lucky enough to make up my mind early on.
So why was that? Who or what was the catalyst for deciding to take up the vocation, and was India kind of major influence?
That's a good question. I think lots of little influences. As you go through life, helping my mum collect the mission boxes. My dad would go with her around, the dark streets of Liverpool at night. And when he couldn't do it, I would go, even though I was only 10 or 11. I was go as my mum's companion. And get home and count the money. And the money was going for missionaries, train missionaries, help poor people in other places. So that was one big influence. And then I suppose the fact that 2 the boys in the class above me, 2 of the boys from my class, and 1 boy from the class below me all went off to train to be priests. And I got to thinking, well, none of them actually became priests, but I'm sure they're going away really put it into my head then. I thought, wow, the guy who went to class below me, he was younger than me and he went. I thought, wow. And then I met a sister, and the sister, she was a parish sister in those days. Poor parishes had sisters. And like social workers, I suppose, for the poor, I suppose. Most of the people now parish would be poor. But wouldn't exaggerate, nobody was starving, but we were poor. Mm. Anyway, she just said to me one night, it was in February 1961, 6:00 in the evening, I was coming out of church, and she just stopped me and she said, are you thinking about being a priest? And even at that age, I knew it wasn't a career, it wasn't something you decided to do. Mm-hmm. At 13, I knew all this. I don't know how I knew, but I did. Probably, environment. I thought, no, it's not like doing anything else. This is like God in some way or other inviting you to do this. And I knew it wasn't like, I'll go away and be a priest, I'll be a priest, come hell or high water. No, I'll go away. Maybe God wants me to do this. I'll give it my best shot. If God wants me to do it, I'll do it. If he doesn't want me to do it, I'm sure there'll be lots of nice people around to say, look, you're a good egg, but it's not going to work. Goodbye. And I wouldn't have cried. I would have just said, right, good, I've tried. And I would have gone off and done something else. So I knew. Anyway, she just said, listen, make up your mind. And it's probably terrible child psychology, to saddle a 13-year-old with this sort of decision. But for me, it worked. Mm-hmm. And I know in my heart of hearts if I did not go, if I did not decide that day, I would never have gone. I know that. It was too easy not to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had lots of friends. Even at 13, I even had an eye on a girl I liked at 13.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, even that, you know, and then, as I say, career, forces, travel, adventure, all that. So she said, look, Justin, you ain't got much to do this, just go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, forget it, but don't give me this, oh, I'll see about it when I'm 18. And as I say, for me, that was great advice. I went home, did my homework, had my tea, went to bed, made my mind up that night in bed. Mm-hmm. Next morning, I told my parents. They were great, so that's what you want to do? Fine. I wrote that day. The next day after I saw the sister, I wrote. That was in February. By September, I was in the seminary for 12 years training. Not easy, but the big decision had been made. The bishop says to you, they get no date. Those who wish to be ordained, take one step forward. I took, like a lot of people, we took that step 12 years before, you know. Anyway, it's all sound a bit dramatic, but I'm telling you how I remember it. And also, you know yourself, Jared, in life, you go through life, you have big decisions to make. Mm-hmm. Education,
yep.
Marriage, career, where to live, what to do,
yep.
All these things. For someone like me, I suppose all those decisions were concertinaed into that winter's night in 1961. I remember lying in bed and looking around my room. It was dark, obviously. And I had, you know, a few pictures on the wall. Picture of St. Francis Assisi, my patron saint. I had a toy cupboard, toy soldiers, all that. Mm-hmm. And I had a few books. I just started to read books that didn't have pictures in because I was a late learner, you know. And I remember looking around the room and thinking, well, goodbye, little room. You know, I'm a visitor now. Mm-hmm. And I was, from then on, that was me leaving home. And it was quite upsetting in a way, you know, for 13. And I knew it was going to be a fairly long road. And also, it's not a road you have complete control over, because it's a road where you may meet someone along the line and say, look, like I said before, this is great, you're great, this is not for you.
Yeah.
And I would have taken that. You know, I wouldn't have fallen down, broke my heart. So.
But I mean, that's quite an interesting insight into just the psyche of you as a 13-year-old, because you were obviously looking to broaden your horizons when you're talking about your room, and you obviously were also looking to challenge yourself when you're talking about the decision and things like that.
Sure.
So those were things, I guess, that were inbuilt already.
Sure. I'm very sad. I mean, leaving home, and I was an only child. You know, I loved my parents like mad, and I loved my home, I loved where I lived. And to realise all of a sudden that it's all over. If I come back here, I mean, I'm going to live here for a few months, and I'll come back as a love visitor. But this is no longer where I belong. I belong on the open road. Sounds a bit melodramatic, but you know, that's what, you leave home. That's, you don't have a home in the same way. It's like the gospel says, you know, you where you lay your head, that's where your home is. And you find, you know, you are at home all over the world. Mm-hmm. And in a funny sort of way, you know, you can always come back to your home as a visitor and be very loved and welcome. But at some stage, just like you get married, maybe, it's, you know, goodbye now. This is my second home now. My first home was where my heart is, where my family is, or for a priest, where your people are, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm talking too much.
Not at all.
That's what happens when you get to be started.
Your stories are more interesting than mine. So, what did your mum and dad think of your decision?
Another great question. That never crossed my mind till a few years ago. You know, it was, in a way, it was all about me. I mean, you know, I sort of vaguely thought, oh yeah, my parents must have, you know, they let me go. And, you know, I'm of an age now where, you know, if I was not a priest, I would have children and grandchildren. And, you know, I was just talking to somebody the other day, I said, well, if I had a son or a grandchild, I wouldn't let them. I don't know about boxing. I certainly wouldn't let them play rugby. It's mad. I've played rugby. Why would you want your kids run around getting kicked in the head at 8 or 9? But my parents were prepared, not just, to let me go forever at that age. And of course, it emptied the house. It emptied the house. I was the family. And my kids, my friends would come and visit and all that. All that ended. So I number one, I never realised till fairly recently what a big sacrifice it was for them to let me go. And what great trust they had in Mill Hill, the priests who were going to train me, because they took the place of my parents. The other thing, I suppose, was, the dangers, away from home and all that, and in a seminary far away and all that. Well, not that far away, but, it could have been on Timbuktu because we never went home except for Christmas and so on. And the other big thing I didn't realise was my parents were so good that they never, ever told me that they were proud of me trained to be a priest, or even that they were proud of me being a priest. I only figured that out later, after I was a priest. In fact, on I think 2 occasions, my mum said to me, on behalf of her and my dad, listen, I hope you're not staying there because you think we want you to be there. You come out anytime. That's fine. If this is what you think you should be doing, great. But they only said to me twice. Once when I was, I think, about 17 or something, and once when I was older, maybe around about 20. But they were definitely, very keen on I shouldn't be doing that for them, because, you hear stories about people getting pushed in by their parents. And maybe that happened. I just never came across it. Came across it, I think, once, twice, out of the couple of hundred people I knew. It's very rare in our day and age. But the opposite was not rare. People saying to their kids, don't dream of doing that. That's what became more normal, in the age we live in. Far from pushing people in, people tell them don't go, But anyway, just mention that in passing. So, big. And later, I found out, my dad died before I was a priest, but my mum lived a long life. And they were probably very pleased in one way that I'd done it. Talking too much again.
No.
You don't have to edit this.
No.
That's
Not at all. Just in terms of your training, where did that take place, and what kind of surprises did your vocation bring?
6 years near Liverpool, but like I say, it might have been on another planet because we only went home twice a year. And the new boys were warned. They said, listen, you're near, you might be able to nick off and see your parents. Remember the kids in Newcastle and London, and Glasgow, they can't do that. So we never did that. We were honourable, So I think the big shocks about my training, there's 2 big shocks. One, no corporal punishment. Because, we were brought up in the 50s. I got the cane at least twice a week when I was in junior school. I got the strap at least once a week when I was in high school. Because that's the way it was. And then we were in the seminary, no corporal punishment. That was a big plus. The big minus was, of course, junior seminaries nowadays, they were built around mistrust. The message we got from the staff was, we don't trust you. And that was the message we picked up. Don't trust each other, we don't trust you. And coming from a home where I was very trusted, and a parish where I was very trusted, and even a school, even though it was terribly strict, Irish Christian brothers, we were very trusted. We were put, sometimes the teacher went out with the class, he'd say, I put you on your honour. And that meant you weren't supposed to wreck the classroom. So we came from a place where we were trusted into a seminary where we were not trusted. And that was a terrible shock. And of course, we lost lots of people because the whole system was a rotten system. And that, thank God, was changed around about the time Vatican II. And we got, the staff were good men, but the system was lousy. And but that died to death, thank God, in the mid-60s. Anyway,
Just in terms of, you were talking earlier on about vocation, what does the term mean to you, the term vocation?
I think it's from the Latin, isn't it? To be called. And I think that's what it's about. God calls people. He usually doesn't do it in the dramatic voice in the clouds or in a dream. Although, you can't restrict God.
Mm-hmm.
God does it the way he thinks. But normally it's through something you see, something you hear, through another person, through the movings of your heart, or maybe the words of the gospel. But somehow or other, God calls you. It may be dead simple. I mean, one of the reasons, I suppose, with me was I looked at these 5 guys who went away and said, okay, but we need priests. It wasn't that I've got to be a priest. No, we need priests. Somebody's got to do this. We need missionaries. Somebody's got to. Who's going to do it? Can I really stand back and say, we need missionaries? Who's going to do it? If it doesn't cross your own mind, we need missionaries. Well, why don't I do it? And that was one of the motivations as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. In terms of choosing to be a Mill Hill father, was that something that was, based on those days around with the box and stuff like that? Was it a long kind of link?
Yeah,
You didn't consider anyone else?
Near the Mill Hill. We were 5 miles from the Mill Hill house, and the mission boxes were started by Mill Hill. They're the main, not in Scotland, but in England and Wales, they're the main mission. They were the main missionary group, and so yeah, that was just natural. And funnily enough, 2 or 3 months after deciding, and Mill Hill accepted me. They came to see me, I think, in February or the March, and they said to me, yeah, we'll see how you feel in September. You still feel the same way. Start, but between those 2 things, we had a missionary. We had a white father in this school, but we also had a Verona. They call themselves Comboni now, but they were Verona fathers. And he was asking everybody thinking about it. I said, well, I'm thinking about it. I was 13. I said, well, I've already signed up for next September for somewhere else. I said, but what I'll do, I'll sell you a calendar, because it was either do you want to be or sell our calendar.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll sell you a calendar. Now, I sold the Verona father calendar till I was ordained. 12 every year. They sent me 12. I sold them, sent the money in. When I was ordained, and I went away as a missionary myself, my mum sold that calendar till she died in 2004. I then took on selling it again till I came to Scotland 2 years ago. Wow. I really probably still should be selling them. When I was selling 12 when I was a missionary in South Africa.
Fantastic. You're talking earlier on about St. Francis. I was going to say, is there a kind of saint or scripture passage that kind of defines or inspires your vocation?
Yeah, I think St. Francis would be my favourite saint, because, and then my name's John Francis. Mm-hmm. My mum, my grandma was a member of the Third Order of St. Francis,
Yeah.
My name's John Francis. And then I was really pleased to find out that St. Francis of Assisi was actually baptised John Francis, the same as me. Mm-hmm. But he dropped the Jonathan because people call him Francis all the time. So yeah, his, love animals, nature, the open road, freedom, even poverty, having less, be more by having less, and all that
appealed
to me, and still does.
Yeah. Just in terms of when you were going through your training, and you spoke about some of the difficulties and stuff like that, where did you draw strength from at that time?
That's a hard question. I don't know. I suppose Our Lady,
yeah.
St. Francis. Yeah. I suppose my ancestors, to some extent. You pray. I didn't know my grandparents. I only met my grandma once. I can just remember she died when I was 3. The other 3 I didn't even know, but I've heard of them. So I'm sure they. I've got this big. I don't know if I've had that forever or just a long time, but I've this big belief in the community of saints, that people are praying for you. People are praying for you. People who you don't know in monasteries or wherever, or convents are praying for you. And then people from your past are praying for you. People from your past who are alive are praying for you. My old head mistress. And so, but then people from your past who are dead are praying for you. And then further than that, your ancestors pray for you. And I suppose when I got to Africa, very late on in my life, I was 57 when I went to Africa. they're very big into the ancestors. In some ways, they're too big into the ancestors. It's like the ancestors are breathing down your neck all the time, so you can have a bit too much of it. But the idea of that, they are somehow concerned about us, that's very Catholic, your saints. So yeah, but your friends. I mean, in the seminary, there are great priests, and some of them are a great example. A lot of them are a great example. But then there's your friends, and your friends, we helped each other. In my class, there were 22 of us set out in September 1961. Now, of those 22, 2 of us became the Hill Fathers. 1 became a diocesan priest, and the other 19 didn't become priests. Mm-hmm. But those 19 helped the 3 of us along the way. And maybe even if they weren't there, maybe we wouldn't have made it. They were the ones who helped us in dark days and so on. We helped each other.
That's a really kind of fascinating insight. You don't really think of that. It's not something you think of. Yeah. So you are ordained, and where did your vocation take you after that?
3 foreign places. Philippines for 7 years. In the 70s. The Falkland Islands, which we looked after for 4 years. That was in the late 80s, after the war with Argentina. And most recently, 13 years in South Africa, till 3 years ago when I came home and was posted to Scotland. In between times, I spent 9 years doing vocations work in the north of England. I spent 3 years as the sort of superior for Mill Hill in Britain. And I was lucky enough to spend 7 years living at home, nursing my mum, who was in her 90s, looking after my mum, who was in her 90s. And every second weekend, I went out to Paris to do mission appeals. And my friends or relations looked after my mum for that weekend. So that's my path really for the last, that's 48 years since I became a priest.
How were you received in each individual country?
Yeah, well, on the whole, great. Philippines was funny because it's a Catholic country. It's like 85% Catholic, I think. And the few Protestants there were Catholics till a few years ago. There were a few Muslims in the south, which we never met. And then there would be a few pagan people, mainly in the mountains and in the forests, who still, have a traditional religion, what we call pagan religion. But 85% people would be Catholic. Yeah, but being a priest and being a foreigner, even though people love you and everything, sometimes they think you're a bit stupid, because you're naive, because your priests don't know much about life, which is probably maybe true when you set out. And being a foreigner, obviously you've got to sit down and start learning the lingo. So for a year or two, you're not much use to anybody really, but you're learning, and that's really important. Then after that, you become part of the scene. I was the only non-Filipino on the island I lived on. I lived on a small island for 5 years with 3,500 Filipinos. But then, my big friend, John O'Neill, he was a fireman in Clydebank. He volunteered to go out to the missions wherever Mill Hill was to send him. So he came to me for 2 years, was my companion, my right-hand man, became my best pal. And after that, he went on to do another 15 years working for the missions in Africa.
Wow.
Either for us, or for SCIAF, or for Red Cross, or UN. different places. Medicine, some frontier, work for all these people. Yeah. So,
And obviously, like, each individual country brings with it its own challenges in terms of you being there on mission. I believe you had quite a challenging person to deal with in the Philippines. Can you tell us a wee bit about that?
well, the mayor at the time, he wouldn't mind me talking about him. I don't even know if he's alive or dead. I'm trying to find out. He would be 2 years older than me. I'm 73. He'd be 74 or 75. He may be dead by now, I don't know. But if not, we'd difficult because he was a strong character. I suppose I'm a bit of a strong character. We were both young. When I went there, I was 28 when I went to that parish. He would have been 29, 30. He was the mayor. And you see, in a Catholic country, the priest has a lot of, not power, but influence. See, the mayor's the Catholic. The mayor has to come to church. He has to listen to me on a Sunday, like it or not. And, so, there's going to be some tension often, unless they're both saints, which neither of us were. So, there was a bit of tension. So, you can imagine, elections, this and that, things like that. So we would be, the church has got a duty to sort of tell people to play by the rules. And sometimes people may not even know what the rules are. So our job might be to tell them what the rules are. So you can imagine how that goes down.
But he left you marooned on an island, I believe.
Well, yeah. But that was I suppose it wouldn't have happened now because we'd both be wiser. But we had some sort of run-in on an island. Because I had 7 islands in the parish.
Yeah.
And basically he was sort of trying to be funny by making fun of me. Well, as I say, when you're older and wiser, you'd sort of laugh it off. But when you're young, you think, oh, hang on a minute, I don't want to be made a fool of it. So I was sort of saying, and then things started getting a little bit more nasty and all that. And it came to a head. And it was like in a film, before a gunfight, you see everybody sort of move away. People started walking away. And in the end, it was just him and me standing talking in the sun on a late Sunday afternoon in 1976 May. I remember it well. And he just said I'm coming to the conclusion that these islands aren't going to be big enough for you and me both. Which is quite intimidating in a way, isn't it? Because we didn't have any police there. The police were the mayor's bodyguards. The mayor was the law.
Yeah.
And I said, I've come to the same conclusion. I said, but make no mistake, if one of us is leaving, it's not going to be me. And he said something like, we'll see about that. And walked away. But what I didn't know was when he walked away, he told everybody else, don't take this guy off this island.
Yeah.
He's going to spend a while here. And it wasn't like Robinson Crusoe, you've got a coconut to eat. It was an island. 500 people lived there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So and then I realised I had a seminarian with me as well. So I was probably teaching him how not to be a priest. But anyway, so he picked up his entourage and left, went back to the main island. And I was left there. And I realised nobody would have the bottle to take me. I didn't have my own boat at that time. To take me back. I wasn't actually going back, I was going somewhere else. But nobody would take me back somewhere else. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I had a couple of hours to cool my heels and think about life and the future and everything. And then this very tough young islander came to me. So I was 28 then. And he would have been maybe 29. Him and his engineer would have been a bit older, in his late 30s. And he just came up to me and said, I believe you want to go to the next time it's coming in Durham. I believe you want to go to Durham. I said, yeah. I said, well, the mayor's put the blocks on that by telling nobody could take me. He said, "Oh, I'll take you." I said, "Are you not afraid?" And he said, "Me? No." He said, "Neither is my engineer." So they took me to the next island, and then I spent a week there. Then I came back to my own island, but I was really anxious, looking over the rail of the ship as we get near my island to see if the church had been burned down.
Oof.
Because stranger things have happened.
Yeah.
But to the mayor's credit, the church was never burned down. And then we got to, get on, and then we had another big humdinger around 2 years later, which was even worse. But we got over it, and in the end, the mayor saved my life. So that's another story. It's too long to tell, but it's true. And so anybody who saves your life, you're going to love, and pray for. He was last heard of in jail for killing some other friends of mine. But that's another story. But if he's still, he'll get out, but he'll have to maybe pay, like myself, maybe a detour through purgatory. So I don't even know if he's alive or dead. And I couldn't even write to him, actually. I wanted to write to him at one stage, but people said, "No, don't write to him, because if you write to him, it looks like he'll wave that letter around, and it'll look like you're condoning the murder of these other people." So I never actually wrote to him, but I sent a message, via other people saying, let his wife know, to let him know that I obviously pray for him every day. So I think prison ended up, a spell in prison, then house arrest. So I'm sure he was out. He ran for mayor from being in prison, but failed, and the chairperson of the parish council beat him to it, which is great. For that was the time when Mrs. Aquino became president, and the Philippines broke free of martial law and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the mayor and his wife, we all ended up somehow or other. We'll all be together in heaven, please God. As I say, after a little sojourn in purgatory for all of us.
But did he also, was it, he threatened to build a road through where the church was?
And that was when, things had got a bit bad then. I'd refused to do a Thanksgiving Mass for an election that he'd rigged.
Right.
And he was furious about that. And to be fair to him, the other side would have rigged it if they got the chance, but they didn't. But yeah, that was a bit, that was really upsetting. He couldn't have Thanksgiving Mass because it was, So then the next thing we heard was they're going to put a road to the church. And so I was ready to evacuate, because I told the Catholics, listen, if this happens, you're a bunch of mice if you don't let the mayor do that,
Yeah.
And anyway, the next thing I actually saw him, and I saw his passing. I said, "Do you want to come up for a few words?" So he came and we sat down. And before I got up my mouth, he said, "I'm giving you 2 rice fields." So I was like, that expression in English, he took the wind out of my sails.
Yeah.
He took the wind out of my sails. And so he looked at me. I don't want to talk forever. But anyway, basically, he was giving me 2 rice fields because I wanted the catechist on another island. Actually, the island where it was marooned. And he wanted to give me 2 rice fields so the catechist would have some food to eat. So I was like, So at the end of it all, I said to him, I remember we were sitting on the balcony, just Saturday morning, in about 1980, I think. It's maybe saying it's summer because it's always summer in the Philippines in summer. So, and I said to him, about this road, it's quite a difficult subject to bring up.
Yeah.
And he said, road? I said, the road that the town council talked about 2 days ago, which is going through the church apparently. He said, what are you talking about? I said, Father John, he said, don't believe everything you hear. Now, there is truth in that, because these stories grow. But the person who told me was at the council meeting. Was my but that's all changed now. He decided to drop maybe just did it to rattle me, and he succeeded, rattle me. But so no road, parish is thriving. We're still there. We've even got a parish on the island where it was marooned, with the resident priest. So the church grows despite all these things, you know. Tell me if I'm talking too much, because
No, not at all.
I ramble.
No,
that's the trouble.
No,
See, nobody ever asked me these things. So when so you dredge all these things out of your memory that you've never spoken about for years and years.
You spoke as well in some of the articles that you've done for us and things like that, about there was kind of feuding families in the Philippines that would come to Mass. And
well, I mean, where we were, it was like living in the 16th century, or like living in the Highlands in the time of Rob Roy. Family feuds, and they've killed one of our family, you've got to get one of their family. So the Mills family, they were half Chinese. The Filipinos were Chinese descent, and the other feuding family were half Spanish. Filipinos were Spanish descent, and they'd been the big cheeses. And by the time I got there, it was the Mills family were the big cheeses.
Yeah.
And so that was and of course, the other family kept on trying to enlist me to be like their supporter, and I couldn't. I like them. I like both families. The Spanish family, they were easier to like than the Mills family, to be honest. But I tried to keep as much neutral as I could.
Yeah.
And actually, I did manage, by the grace of God, on another island. I went 3 biggish islands and 4 small islands. So on the other biggish island, where both the Merse family and the Ravel family originate, I actually managed, by the grace of God, to get them to stop feuding for a couple of years. And we managed that. They actually stopped. And when I left, it broke out again, and there was a big murder, multiple murder, and that's where. But I'd gone by then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did. There was that side to it.
But at its height, were you having to like take guns off them as they came into the parish? Or?
Well, only. Yeah. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
But it's not as dramatic as it sounds. We just had the big. We did, we had a law. We had a rule in the parish: no guns in church. That was the idea.
Yeah.
But we didn't mind if it was a policeman or a soldier and it was in a holster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I suppose if it was a handgun, it was out of sight. All right. And I suppose if it was a knife and it was out of sight, we weren't going to be like rigorous. But what we didn't allow in rifles, machine guns, machine pistols, grenades. We weren't that keen on machetes and bayonets, although, machetes part of you wear as a man, they were left outside and all that. Yeah, so it was quite strict. And we got to the stage, because it was tense at one time, there's a Merse gang, the rival gang, and then the military was sent in. So we had like 3 potential sources of conflict in church. So weapons had to be out for that. And then, as I say, the thing was they were to be given to my head altar server, who was 11. He was the custodian of weapons.
Jeez.
And he had to take them up and put them on my bed. And the deal was they had to take the magazine out. And I didn't want them handing a load of magazines.
Absolutely not.
But magazines out, they also serve them, take one and put them on my bed. But that only lasted for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And if some guys wouldn't take the magazine out, so no, I'm not taking that magazine because we're going to have a shootout right outside church. So magazine stays in. I said, well, in that case, put the safety catch on, and I put it on my bed.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would take it up and put it on my bed. But it only went on for a couple of weeks, then it all calmed down a bit.
I was going to say, you'd have probably had to be a very hardy passkeeper or altar server to deal with that.
The only other one, the only big one with the weapons was, I got am I going on too much?
No, not at all.
It was with Pentecost. Things were so bad on one island that people wouldn't come together. You see, because think 17th century Highlands of Scotland. There were feuds. You know, their family would kill one of their family. They promised they'd kill one of their family. The first one they saw, they would kill. They'd say, well, okay, because they've done that, we'll have to kill them first. So they're living on a small island. Everybody's dead keen not to see one of the other crowd because they see them, they've taken this oath. So you imagine the tension that puts on you. You're living on an island 4 or 5 miles long by 1.5 miles wide. And for a couple of years, you try not to see each other or pretend you don't see each other. So I said, look, so Holy Week, we're a Holy Week in this village for the people in that village. Good Friday in this village. Easter night service in this village. Easter morning service in this village. Because you couldn't have it in a central place because 3/4 of people wouldn't go because they wouldn't enter the stronghold of the other people.
Jeez.
So we did that for 2 years. And then I think the third year, the 4th year, it was with. And I said, look, it's with. I can't go around saying 4 masses. I'm not going to do it anyway. So we'll have mass in the one place. So I said to the people in this one place, I said, listen, this was their stronghold. I said, would you give safe conduct to the other crowd to come to Mass for Pentecost? And they said, okay, we'll give safe conduct. So I went back to the other crowd and said, they promise you can come. They won't attack you. You can come to the Pentecost Mass. And they said, okay. But I was the guarantor. Mm-hmm. So I trusted both sides, and both sides trusted me. They didn't trust each other. So for Pentecost, it was in the stronghold of the Mers family, and the other people came. So big crowd of people, you know.
Jeez.
And and the people who came hung their guns and machetes on the fence outside the. It was like an open air mass, but they hung the weapons there. And the Merseyside, they had their weapons out the way, you know. Mm. And so we had mass. So that was great. And then after that, I had a couple of years of peace. Until I went away, it was peace, thank God, and things broke out later. But I remember at the sign of peace, it was the best sign of peace I think I remember since I've been a priest. So we came to the sign of peace. And I remember, and God helps you, you know. I'm not that smart, you know. I failed my A levels, I got 1 O level. You know, I'm not a clever person. I'm not, but experience, I suppose, training, all these things kick in. So, and the grace of God. So I remember saying at the sign of peace, I looked up and I said, okay, everybody, I could speak very good Filipino language. So I said, okay, everyone, sign of peace time. So it was like, look at shoes, look at feet. I said, now we have a choice. A, B, and C. A, don't give the sign of peace. It's not very Christian, mm-hmm. but it's honest. B, hypocrisy. Give the sign of peace, don't mean it. But at least you don't embarrass yourself and everybody else. That's number 3. This is the Christian option. Give the sign of peace, even though you can't stand the person you give the sign of peace to, and try to mean it. You choose. I didn't look. I got on with what I was doing. I gave a gentle sign of peace and got on with things. So I don't know what they did, but I hope they gave the third one, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the mayor, you and him worked together in a very, very special way. Can you tell us a wee bit about that?
Yeah. By the way, the mayor's nephew became a Mill Hill father.
Oh, right.
30 years later. Anyway, that was, some of my islanders rescued 62 ethnic Chinese Vietnamese. So the way we're British, but we're ethnically Irish. Mm. We're ancestors, my ancestors are Irish. So Vietnam and China were at war. So the Vietnamese turned on the Vietnamese people who had Chinese grandparents. because they were ethnic Chinese and therefore not trusted in a war situation. In one way you can understand it, but most of these people were really Vietnamese. They even fought with the Vietnamese against the French, against the Yanks. Anyway, they were then the second wave of boat people. First wave were just people who'd, fought on the side of the Yanks in the war, or who the communists didn't like. But the second wave were ethnic Chinese. 62 of them ended up on one of my islands. They were rescued. 40 of them ended up with me, living with me. 22 went straight to the refugee camp in Manila. So then a word came out that there was talk of these people being repatriated by the Philippines, sent back to Vietnam. And this was horrendous because the younger ones would have gone into the Vietnamese army and had to fight the Khmer Rouge, the Cambodians, which was, nobody wants to do that because they were fierce, and cruel. So anyway, so the young men said rather than go back, they would actually, they wouldn't go back. They would kill themselves rather than go back. So these 40 people, so they ranged from a man in his late 60s down to, I suppose, the youngest child that I had at the time would have been 6, 7. So there was a range of people, and they were really quite upset. They didn't want to go back. Their dream was to go to America, or maybe Germany, or Australia, or whatever. One or two even stayed in the Philippines. But anyway, that was, what are we going to do now? Anyway, the mayor heard about it. Now, the mayor was ethnic Chinese, so he had some sympathy for these people as well. So he came over to the house one day, and he asked to speak to the people. So we'd been, we were more or less at peace at the time, I think, because we only had these two really big bust-ups, one over, early on, and one over the election. So we were on speaking terms and everything. But he actually stopped his wild guard dogs actually mauling me one day as well. I forgot about that. So that's also to his credit. He could have just walked away. But anyway, he asked to speak. So we were there, and I remember the little speech he gave, and he said, listen, everybody. He said, there is a president, who's President Morris in the Philippines and all that. He said, and there's Pope in Rome, Bishop in the capital. He said, but we live on remote islands, and what counts here is my word and Father John's word. He said, and if we agree, obviously, in brackets, we don't always agree, but he said, if we agree, it's nothing else really matters. He said, and I agree with Father John. There's no way you're going back to Vietnam. And I know you want to go to America and Germany, and if we can facilitate that, great. He said, if we can't, if worst comes to worst and you can't go there, he said, you're not going to Vietnam. He said, I have some fields on the next island, and you would be very valued members of our community, and you would be valued. You stay with here, this will be your home. And he said, and you have my word. He said, and I give my word in front of Father John. He said, that's it. Now those people, that's the first time, I'd had them with me for 2 weeks. Now that's the first time I saw anybody cry. And a couple of them cried. Because these people, they'd had civil war in Vietnam. They'd had the communist takeover, which was probably worse than the Civil War, brainwashing, all this sort of stuff. They'd been at sea 34 days in, a boat without an engine. They'd been 8 days without food. They'd been living as refugees, hand to mouth, for 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks before that, on somewhere else. So they'd been through the mill, and here they were, they had nothing. And all of a sudden, kindness is being shown to them, not just by me and the people, but it's been shown by, the representatives of officialdom. And they're not going anywhere unless they want to go, and they can stay here. And that was the fallback, so if everything else fails, we can at least stay here and live and be fed and have our kids educated and be safe. And that was a big, big thing for them. Big thing for the mayor and me, I suppose, but certainly a big thing for them. And so that was a great, happy ending. Eventually, they went to the refugee camp. Eventually, they got to where they wanted to go.
Right.
One died, 2 stayed in the Philippines. The rest all ended up in America, Germany, Australia.
How long were they stuck at sea for?
They were at sea 34 days, 32 days without an engine.
Uh-huh.
They had no captain and no engineer because they'd been taken off by the Coast Guard, the Communist Coast Guard, and the rest of them would have been detained, but a storm came and the ship dragged the tankers forced out to sea.
Okay.
So they were at the mercy of the waves.
Right.
And one man, he was a watchmaker, he took on the responsibility to get them through. He made himself the captain. He got them through. The strain, I think, killed him. He died, I think, in the refugee camp, if not maybe just as soon as they got to Australia. He was in his early 40s. Mr. No, a hero. Because when that happened, somebody who wants the responsibility for the safety of 34 people, men, women and children. And he said, well, somebody's going to have to do this. He tied the rudder stick to his arm. It was tied with rope onto his arm. That day and night, he obviously get up and go for a piece. Somebody else have to hold it for 10 minutes. Other than that, day and night, waking and sleeping, he had the rudder. He played the waves and kept the boat afloat, and got them to the reef where they hit and broke up. And they were too weak to swim at that stage.
Yeah.
There'd been no food for 8 days. The only water, they'd lie on the deck and drink the rainwater as it fell.
Uh-huh.
So when they hit the reef, they could all drown. Then my people swam. I wasn't there at the time. My people swam out, rescued the 62, and nobody was lost. Mm-hmm. Fantastic story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you must have been quite proud of your parishioners that did that, because...
And they then sent for me, and I came, and then between us, we looked after them, and when the mayor came back, the mayor had been away, he took over looking after them as well.
We often say at Missio Scotland that our missionaries, they do life-saving work and life-giving work, and that's definitely, I would say, a great example of that. Yeah. You're somebody who's been a missionary on 3 continents, I think, Americas, Asia and Africa. Do you have any standout memories from your time in the Falklands or in South Africa as well?
Quickly, the Falklands. We used to talk about Africa. I was there 13 years, and like you say, Africa gets into your blood. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect to come away from Africa. I expected to leave my bones there. But funnily enough, just thinking about the Philippines the other day, A Tale of Two Cemeteries. It occurred to me after I'd been there for a while. See, the Argentines, they lost about between 600 and 700 men in that war with Britain. Mm. Britain lost over 300 men. So between them, we lost 1,000 men. Let's not count another 1,000 who were wounded. And the Argentines have a little cemetery on the Falklands. So after I'd been there a year or two, I said to the Monsignor, who's my boss, I'm sure there hasn't been a mass said in the cemetery for the dead. He said, I'm sure there hasn't. But he hadn't said one. Yeah. So I said, well, I'll fix it up. So I spoke to the British commander and said, look, I'm going to say a mass in the cemetery for the Argentine dead. And he was great. He said, yeah, good. And then I always remember him saying to me, he said, of course, if we'd lost, you'd still be here, wouldn't you? This would be an Argentine garrison. You'd be talking to the Argentine commander about saying mass for us. I said, yeah. He said, I get that. He said, no, go ahead. So I said the Mass, it was just me, one British soldier, and the RAF always, and I opened for a bit of publicity, sent a photographer. You know, so there was me, a Catholic soldier, and the photographer. And I wasn't unhappy about there being a photographer, because he took a shot, and I thought, well, with any luck, this may find its way back to Argentina, and people will know that, you know, somebody to say Mass for their dead sons, you know, fathers, husbands. So anyway, that was that. We did that. And then 2 years later, the International Red Cross came to see me, and they had arranged with the British forces to have a Mass and a visit by the next of kin. So the Argentine next of kin, over 350 of them came. I say the Red Cross brokered it. Argentine government didn't want anything to do with it because they didn't want anything to do with the British. But the British Armed Forces, who were the custodians of the graves, they arranged it. So, and it was directly Red Cross and British Forces. Now, I was on the committee that helped organise the visit from the British Forces side, because they asked me to come on the committee. So we organised that, and that was great. And the Red Cross guys said to me, they said, of all the things we've ever organised along these lines, they said, this is the best we've ever done. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very delicate, because imagine you're being hosted. Imagine it's you now. You're being hosted to visit your dad's grave by the people who killed your dad. Mm. So it's a minefield, you know. But the forces were great, and they made sure there was no guns anywhere. You know, guns out of the way, everybody's no guns anywhere. And there was very few girls on the island in those days. There was a couple of wrens, a couple of WAFs, and a couple of women's army corps. But they got 12 girls together, and they gave each of the girls, I think 20 of the next of kin. Mm. And the girls were the ones who brought them to the graves and all that. So that was great. And it was because imagine, you got like, it's 7 or 8 years since you last, your son or your husband or your father went off to war. Mm. And often, the sad thing, of course, they got there. A lot of these poor kids, some of them died at sea, obviously there's no grave. Some were shot down, no grave. Some were blown to bits, no grave. Yeah. So some of the graves had, names. Mm-hmm. Others had because when they were killed, even your identity tag, the Argentine identity tags, I think they were plastic. So they went too, and so often the graves just said an Argentine serviceman, known unto God. Yeah. So apparently when they came, what they did, they got this and they realised with the shock, a lot of them, there was no, Pablo Castro grave. There was a few that had names and their relations went to them, but many didn't. So the others, they went, they spread themselves out and went to the graves. So they did that. I wasn't there. I was the general decided I'd be more use looking after the girls who were looking after so that was my job. I was back at base for the girls when they came back. But that was a great thing. It was a great thing for us, for the forces, because, soldiers don't have antipathy towards their enemy. Yeah. Certainly once the enemy surrenders, once he's wounded, certainly once he's dead, professional soldiers don't have that. And they know that could be us. And the other side of the island, there was a little graveyard for some of our guys, where I also said Mass. Because after I'd done this, I thought, well, I better do something for our guys as well. So I did a mass there for our guys. But anyway, that was very moving, and great thing, like I say, for the servicemen. Great things to the islands. The islanders didn't want anything to do with it, because they're still very much under the threat of invasion from Argentina. It's a big country next door, so they weren't dead keen on the whole thing, but they didn't interfere.
Yeah.
They let it go ahead. But I'm sure it was something helped, the people involved. It won't solve all the political problems, but it certainly was a great thing for us who were involved in it.
And that, obviously sated the young John Doran's appetite to be involved with the army some way.
I always believe God gives you what you ask for in a funny sort of way, So I thought I was giving up a life of high adventure and, being even tied up with the forces. But lo and behold, I've had all those things in my life, without having to shoot anyone or get shot myself.
Yeah.
So, best of all worlds.
And what about Africa? Any standout memories from South Africa?
I think there's millions, but I suppose one of them would be, after a few years, I was there about 3 years, we were having a barbecue. And what people forget about South Africa, you see, is, we all know the Zulus and the Basotho and other people that are Africans. But what people forget is most of the whites, their families have been there for 300 or 400 years. Their families have been in Africa. A lot of my families have been in England, and they're Africans, they're white Africans. And since we got rid of apartheid, we also have a chance of being black and white Africans together, which we didn't before. But I remember I was with the guys, a hunter, and we were out at night and we were cooking some meat on a fire. And I had some seminarians with me as well. And he was very good, he let us camp there and that, because we used to take the seminarians out, it's good for them, out in the wild and all that. And anyway, he just said to me, he said, out of the blue, he just said, "You'll never leave Africa." And I laughed. I'd only been there 3 years. I said, "What do you mean I'll never leave Africa?" He said, "You'll never leave Africa." I said, "Listen, I'm an Oriental missionary. I happen to be posted for Africa for now." I said, "Look," he said, "No," he said, "I've been watching, it's in your eyes." He said, "Africa's got into your blood." He said, "You won't leave." And actually, I was brought back by Mill Hill to help out in Britain, Scotland, England, Wales. But left to myself, I fully expect to stay in Africa. I'd been there 13 years. I think he was right. Even at that stage, he picked up something that Africa gets into your blood,
Yeah. So,
listen, I'm going to have to go. Is it all right? We come back. Finish.
I'll just pause it now.
You don't see me, do you? You just hear me?
No,
yeah.
Did you see? So, Father John, what are the most important qualities or characteristics that a missionary must possess?
Okay, it's a stock answer, but because I did vocations work for 9 years, the things I had in my mind for people who think of joining us, I would say, mind you, a lot of these could be for other walks of life, a good dad, a good husband, but especially I think the mission. 3 things. Generosity. If you're not generous, it's not going to work. But then, like I said, it's a general thing, isn't it, for being a good Christian, I think.
Sure.
Generosity. Determination. You can call it other names. Perseverance, used to call it in the past. Stickability, whatever you want to call it. Adaptability. You've got to be adaptable. You can't say, "Oh, I don't like English people," or "I don't like Welsh people." Or, you can't do that. You can't. You've got to be adaptable. You can't even say, "I don't like rice." Deep down you may like rice, but you've got to make a go at eating it because it's all people are eating. You can't insult people.
Yeah.
And also, the whole thing to be with very poor people sometimes. Also, sometimes to be with rich people. To be adaptable, to be. And when you get down to language and all these sort of things, you've got to try. You can't just say, "This is the way we do it in Liverpool," and everybody else is wrong. So I think those 3.
Yeah.
They're not particularly world-shattering things, but take any one of them away, and a person's not going to make it as a missionary. Probably not even going to get through the training.
Leads on to my next question, I guess. Then, what's the positives and negatives about being a missionary?
The positives are loads. You name it. Positives are just great. So many I can't count. I suppose the thing of, it's also been part of being a Catholic, isn't it? But the idea that, you step off the boat in Hong Kong or somewhere, and because of all the good priests who've gone before you, because it works the other way now, because priests are doing bad things, you also have to pick up some of the flack for that,
Mm-hmm.
But on the whole, a naval chaplain told me once, he was on the Ark Royal, they were docking in Australia, and there was this very beautiful young woman with a sports car, and she asked for him, and the sailors were all laughing at him and everything, and she handed him the keys, and one of the officers said to him, "Who's this? Is your niece or anything?" He said, "I've no idea." He said, "She's a Catholic, and she heard there was a Catholic priest on board, and we're staying a couple of days, and she's giving me her car." Isn't that great? And he could just choose getting in because he's dropping it home, or going with it, show him the sights. But isn't that just fabulous? And that's sort of thing. That's an extreme example.
Yeah, of course.
The way you feel.
Not everybody gets a sports car when they dock.
No, pretty girls as a companion. But isn't that great? So there's that whole side of it. And I suppose, I don't know, you're an outsider very often. I mean, you come back after years away, and you never quite fit in again. Did you see the film Dancing in Lunessa?
Oh, yes.
He's one of our priests.
All right, well.
And it's more or less a true story,
Yeah.
And Brendan Friel's his nephew, the guy, the playwright. Yeah. He's writing about this guy, and it's coming back. And it's that idea, you come back, especially in those days.
Yeah.
You live years and years in Africa. You only come home every 10 years in those days. So, you never quite, I suppose, fit in again in one way. So, I think about being a professional foreigner. But there's nothing wrong with that. You get used to it, and you get to like it because you can say things as well as a foreigner that other people can't say, and can ask questions that other people wouldn't dare to ask. So there's lots of I told you that thing tonight about the soldiers and the sunshine, and no, it's out there about what are we going to call you?
No, I don't think so.
Amongst many places I've been, I was in Ascension Island on the equator, and we had a TA unit from Coatbridge and Airdrie for 2 weeks.
Mm.
Hot weather training. It's like a desert, and I actually knew the officer. The officer was a regular soldier. He was a major. He was a lapsed Catholic. Then there was a TA officer. I think he was a full lieutenant. He was a Catholic. And so he was a reservist. And there were 30 soldiers. One of them a girl. She was the medic. 10 of the soldiers would be Catholics, so baptised Catholics, maybe not practicing much, depends. And then 10 would be Orange, and 10 were more or less nothing, roughly. Anyway, on day 1 or day 2, so I was staying in the RAF camp, same place as the soldiers, and on day 1 or day 2, 2 or 3 of the Protestant lads came to see me, and they said, "What are we going to call you?" I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, we're not calling you father." I said, "That's okay." They said, "Well, we'll call you Sir, or John, that's your name, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, that's fine, boys. Come call me John, call me Sir if you want, I don't mind, right? So that was that, fine. So a couple of days later, I'm walking down the street with a couple of the Catholic soldiers talking, and 2 or 3 Protestant soldiers are coming up the street, and one of them shouts across, "Morning, Father John." And I was quite taken aback, because it's very hard for a guy, if you've been brought up your whole life, priests are not great guys, and you only call God Father, and you don't call these guys Father. So for him to do that, it's quite a big ask in a way,
Mm-hmm.
So he's done that, he's called me, and I was quite touched. I was just acknowledging when one of the Catholic soldiers put his arm across me, and he said, "Hey," he said, "cut that out." He says, "He's not your Father John, he's our Father John."
Oh, jeez.
So, you've got to be, in a way, it's, so you have to navigate through things like that, I suppose. But it's all good because, they're all together in the one unit, they're all getting on, they've got to get on. Yeah, so, hard to say what's bad, because the language, unless I learned the Filipino language very well, very well. When I went to Africa, I was 57. I was too old. I was too old to really get a grip. So I managed in Africa, but I was never completely at home because I never completely cracked the language.
Yeah.
And that was a big cross. And it's one of the great things about being here in Scotland, or England, that, you don't have to stop and think of what you're trying to say because it just comes naturally.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense, yeah. So what about the term mission? What does the term mission mean to you?
I wonder, what would you say?
A lot of the time when I get into the schools, I always say that, in terms of missio comes from the Latin meaning to go out.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like to go out of yourself and to give to other people.
Yeah. Well, I can't really improve on that. Do you know in the Mass, they call the Mass, and people say, "Well, they call the Mass the Mass." Well, some people say they call the Mass the Mass because in Latin, the last words of the Mass are "ite missa est," go. The Mass is ended, but it's something to do with mission, go. And that's why the church isn't keen on people sticking on loads of prayers at the end of Mass, because the idea is this is the last thing that the priest is saying. He's saying, go, the Mass is over. Now it's time to go out and try and live what we're talking about and what we're praying about. So, yeah, what you're saying is right. It's to try and. I was there once when Bishop Daniels, he was tipped to be the Pope a few years ago, but he was the Cardinal Archbishop of. It was basically Brussels. Mm-hmm. In Belgium, and somebody asked him about being a missionary, about what should do a missionary, and he said that a missionary, he said, is a man who goes to a place and settles down there, tries to learn the language, tries to lead a Christian life for about 30 years. He said, that's it. He said, it's the witness, it's the trying to be there and be with people. It's not so much what you say, but it's how you try to live. And that's great, isn't it? So that means you can do it even in a place where it's illegal to spread the gospel. Communist country. Mm-hmm. Some Muslim countries. That you can't spread the gospel. You can't go out and preach on the streets.
Yeah.
But you can live there, you be with the people, love them, all that, help educate them, all these things.
I think previously you said being a missionary is about trying to be a Christian where you are. I think that's quite well summed up as well.
Right.
In terms of that, how can lay people be missionaries and live out their mission? It's quite succinct for priests or religious sisters to know what they need to do, but what the lay people?
I know. I think we're in some way we're privileged, aren't we? So I remember one my rich white parishioners in South Africa saying to me, I was saying, trying to live the gospel, and he said, "Yeah, it's great. He said, it's great you're doing it." He said, "But don't forget, you're doing it because I'm paying your bills." There's a lot of truth in that as well. Mm. I mean, priests can afford to be poor because somebody else is paying their bills. And often it's not just the rich people doing it, often it's poor people doing it. So I think it was St. Francis always get mixed up with singing St. Francis de Sales and Philip Neary. I think it's Francis de Sales. He's big on this thing of, you know, as a baker, as a housewife, as a soldier, as a nurse, as a priest, we're all called to holiness where we are. So sometimes you get people thinking, oh, if only you get priests thinking, if you've got a priest who's trying to live like a monk, the parish is going to be in trouble. And if you've got a housewife trying to live like she's a nun, the family's going to be in trouble. So it's trying to be a Christian where you are, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the situation you find yourself. And, you know, loving your family, loving your kids, looking after an elderly parent, you know, looking after your child, being fair to your workers, being an honest employee, all these things are all, and especially when it's not in the public eye, nobody knows. Who knows? Well, I know, and God knows. You know, it's I suppose, living your life, not saying the gaze of God, but not in a judgmental gaze, but you know, like when a child says to its parents, "Come and watch me do this. Come and watch me stand on my hands. Come and watch me play." You know, and I think God is the person who's always ready to come and watch us. And you know, the trick is we try and do something that'll make him pleased rather than make him sad. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. You've obviously through the Mill Hill have got a very special connection with Missio England and Wales, and you've got quite a connection with us here in Missio Scotland as well. Why would it be important for people to support, Missio Scotland and its partners in the PMS worldwide? Why are we an important charity in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think it's great because in the Falklands, for instance, we were supported by Missio Spain, of all people. And you think Spain, well, Spanish speaker, they're going to be friends in Argentina. Why would they want to give money to the church in Argentina? Well, the reason is because we're Catholics, and so they don't mind. They might mind, but to them, whether they're supporting the church in Argentina or the Falklands or wherever, that they support where Rome said, look, this year you're support, or this for these next 20 years, you're going to support the 2 priests and the 40 Catholics in the Falkland Islands, because they can't really, there's not enough of them to support themselves. And the church in Spain does that. And there's nobody writing in saying, oh, we don't think we should support these 2 English priests. Not at all. It doesn't work like that because it is the church. And so one of the great things about Missio is, most of my parish was very poor in South Africa. And on Mission Sunday, all these poor people, as well as giving a few rand for the church in the Philippines, in South Africa, they also had a special collection, which came to maybe 30, 40 quid, and that was sent to the bishop, and that was sent to Johannesburg. And it mightn't go physically to Rome, but Rome is told, we've collected this, and Rome says, right, great, well, this year, that money you've collected is going to go to the Aborigines in Australia or something. So it's the idea that the church is everywhere. It isn't just me and my immediate needs. We've got me and my immediate needs. We've got the SVP. We've got loads of things which are important for here. But it's this idea of also of the going out there, go out to all nations. And Missio gives people a chance to do that. And most of the people who are dishing out cash in Missio are also praying for us. So that's, even more important, isn't it?
Sure. Father John, thanks for being so free with your time today for us, and God bless your work and God bless the work of the Mill Hill Palace.
Jared, thank you very much for doing this, and I'm very grateful for the chance to share these things with you and maybe other people too.
Absolutely, and we'll catch up real soon. Thank you.
Great.